Welcome back to the Jackson Neill Music Podcast here on Thursday, November 15th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, or YouTube, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. This podcast is here. And today, I have a very, very special guest on the show. Really happy to do this interview. She's doing a project that, as soon as I heard about it, I knew I needed to get her on the podcast because it is something I'm looking forward to for the rest of this year and into next year, and that is The Year of Mac Miller on DJ Booth by Donna-Claire Chesman. Donna was really, really nice enough to come onto the podcast to discuss this project. She's about three articles in talking about Mac Miller and just his meaning that his music had during when it was created and now going forward. It's a really, really cool project. She's touched on albums like Blue Slide Parka's EPU, and she's going to be doing it I think it started earlier this month or late October, right around there, and she's going to be doing it all the way until late October of 2019. 52 opinion pieces on Mac Miller. I am certainly so excited. I was really happy I get a chance to talk with her. So that interview with her coming up on this podcast. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Believe the Hype. They're a brand new company. They get the latest drops in sneakers, and they sell them right back to you guys. Right now, they have the new A$AP Rocky Under Armour collaboration in select sizes. Visit the links in the description to find their Instagram and Twitter accounts, as well as their store account to buy new sneakers. With that, let's head into my interview with Donna discussing her project, Year of Mac Miller. All right, so I just kind of want to jump into it. Like, what made you decide to do this project?
I feel like I have a very weird kind of cosmic kindred connection to Mac Miller. If you read the piece I wrote a couple hours after he died, you scroll down, there's a 3-foot portrait of him in my living room, and I feel like that kind of is a good synopsis of it. He and his music have been so instrumental to me understanding myself across all phases of my life, so I wanted so very badly to commemorate him. And originally, when I came to my editors with this, I said, let me write about him once a day. They're like, we know you can, but we don't think you should. I was like, okay, how about once a week? And then we ended up going forward with that, and that's how we landed on Year of Mac. It's just my way of kind of paying homage to somebody who, changed my life in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such an incredibly cool project to be doing, and I read that piece from you, just a very personal, very incredible piece, and it's so crazy, like you said, of how much it has mirrored your life. As I read that, I thought no one better could do this kind of project than you could.
Thank you. That means so much to me. Before we got on the phone, I finished writing what I think is the 12th one, for the 9th of January, so that would make it the 12th one. So I'm very much so, like, I wake up every morning and I do a little bit of work, and then I do a little bit of work on the project. So it's just like a staple of my life at this point.
Gotcha. I mean, I was about to ask, a year, that's 52 opinion pieces about Mac Miller, and while he has, this large discography, I mean, is it at all kind of intimidating for you to be writing this many pieces about one artist?
After 12, still no. Before I need to think of more ideas, I have 3 more to get through, and then I kind of pitch them in batches. I'll write out about 5 or 6, try to plan a month and a half out, and I haven't been strapped for ideas yet. I have so much to say about him. I have so many anniversaries to write about, and probably my favorite part is I have so many collaborators to speak with. So next week, we're putting out an interview with Dan, who produced, so much of the discography, and those conversations just mean the world to me, hearing people talk about who Malcolm was as a person, what his music meant to them, what working with him meant to them. It's such a beautiful moment, and I think it really captures just the magnetism of him as a person. And that's really the goal, is to commemorate the music, but also to make sure that we remember how magnetic and how loving of a person he was as well.
I mean, exactly. Just, for every story you hear from people in the industry, they talk about how great of a person he was. And I guess that kind of leads me to my next question in terms of, just remembering him. What is it in your mind that makes Mac's music so timeless?
Oh, my God.
It's a loaded question, I know.
I think that he lived and he wrote about it almost one-to-one. So you ever have these experiences, I think this is a Dimitri Martin joke, but do you ever have those experiences where you are going through your day and you have to look around and ask if someone's pranking you?
Mm-hmm.
I think he took those moments where it's like, there's no way this could be real life, but it is. And I think he wrote about them so eloquently for so long. And that's why his music is going to live on. And that's why it's so touching, because he had this uncanny ability to take just the fringes of life, the experiences that maybe we shouldn't be having, and turn them into these really tangible things that people can latch onto. So I guess the short answer is he made people feel less alone. But I think the longer-winded answer is he knew how to kind of surgically pick apart life and put the parts of it that we don't really know how to discuss into words.
Mm-hmm. And I think I definitely agree with that. I think that's, very, very well put. I mean, it's just the fact that, as a fan of his big fan of his music myself, it's just that almost relatability factor and that ability, like you said, to talk about things that almost everyone goes through, but I don't know if anyone said it like he did.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely what it is. I don't think anyone really knew at his level how to describe just so many, like even the song Insomniac, I think about that one a lot off of Faces. I think it's the 18th track, where he starts talking about how like deranged it makes him feel to not sleep. And I don't know if you ever just like go days without sleeping, but you go through this fog and it's very difficult to verbalize what that feels like. But he can. And I think that's exactly what it comes down to, is no one else was grabbing at those moments and putting them in words quite like him.
Exactly, and I know exactly what track you were talking to. I've listened to that track a couple times, several times. Face is one of my favorite projects, and I think like one thing in my mind that he put that was so relatable, and I know it's just such a big saying you think from Mac's discography, but just the saying, we're just some other fucking kids, and it's like you when you're a kid and you listen to that and you heard that on that project, for some reason, so simple, but just made you feel so much in that one phrase.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's everything. That's his entire artistry in terms of writing summed up. Even when he got very abstract with it, even when he was loading up his lyrics with non sequiturs, even when it didn't seem like it pieced together, if you just sat down, it was all very simple and it was all very honest and it was all very human. He was never self-aggrandizing. He was never anything more than Mac Miller. And I think that's what made his work so beautiful.
Exactly. Really played, discovered himself as an artist and was constantly evolving. And I want to get to some of your first articles right now. And in the first one, you started with the song Dunno from his latest album, Swimming.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about this project, and when I first heard about it, my brain raced of all the different possibilities where you could start this journey, whether it was chronologically or kind of all over the place. What made you decide to start it like this?
Well, I'd love to tell you that there was some thing that struck me, but really what happened was it was a Saturday and I was reading on the couch and I started to think of the lyrics, the part where he says, wouldn't you rather get along? I was like, wow, that's kind of an irreverent thing to say. And then I started thinking about how irreverent the whole song is. I was like, you know what? This is kind of how I feel. Because when he died, I took it very badly, obviously. And I started to panic, and I texted a couple of people, and I said, didn't he know that I needed him? Didn't he understand that? And that kind of sensation, I thought, really permeated the track. So then I got up, and I just started kind of writing, and I started reading the words, and I listened back to it, and I was like, wow, this is really a song about accepting things that just don't feel right. And it's about a very specific kind of disappointment, and not anger, but refining it to disappointment, but also coming to a point of acceptance. And I was like, those are the stages of grief for me. And so it became the first piece.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's just so crazy that Swimming was his last release before his death, because it felt like the album was filled with moments just like that, just like you described, including, the track To Know, and just the entire project itself just felt exactly like that track. And I thought that was an interesting way that it all kind of ended.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, and Craig Jenkins wrote about this in Vulture, and he's a genius, so all praise to him. But he wrote about in his little peep review how it's a disservice to the artist to only view their music through the lens of death. So that's something I've been really conscious of as I write these, is I don't want to just continuously tell you how sad things sound because he's no longer alive. And right before we hopped onto this, I ended up writing something kind of similar about how swimming, so much of swimming sounds quite morose through the lens of his death. But what you can really hear on that album was that he wanted to live, and what you hear from everyone around him is that he wanted to live. And there's one line on Ladders where he's talking about castles made of sand, and it just sounds like he was ready for more. And that's really what I want people to take away from Year of Mac, is not that he died and now everything is sad and all of his music is prophetic, and because I think that's reductive. I want people to really take away the fact that he was ready for more, and he was so much bigger than just himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. I remember when when it did come out, there was almost this, in my sense, when I listened to it, there was this sense, there was a lot of hope you got from the album. And unfortunately, like you said, when you look at it back now after his death, some of that gets tainted. But I think so far, through your first couple of articles, you've been able to do a really good job of, like you said, not just looking at everything through that singular scope. One moment in your pieces that really sticks out to me is when you're talking about Blue Slide Park in your second one, and you do bring up how critics did pan it, and that you kind of talk about that album that, yes, everything isn't just great. There are certain shortcomings right here, and I think you've done a pretty good job of staying that kind of objective writer but still honoring his legacy.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, let's be realistic. Blue Slide Park is Blue Slide Park, but I love that record, and I think that you can be a critic and love something that's not critically fantastic, and you can still describe it without, panning it. And I think, that one definitely did focus a lot more on his death, because it was about, I titled it something in the realm of, like, not taking happiness for granted, which obviously wouldn't have come to pass had he not died. But I think that's kind of evergreen, too. That album is about not taking happiness for granted. Even if he were still alive, just looking through his discography, like moments like Faces, like watching movies, like moments on Good AM, the way that fame consumed him, it's still about that. And so that's my goal. So I'm happy that you took that away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, and just going back to that project, I think, talking about, like you said, you can look at it through, like, whether the critical lens or just enjoying it. I think it's cool that you're able to look through it through both lenses. But this album, Blue Slide Park, about not taking happiness for granted, I think it's just such an important moment in his discography, because it's that album before you started to get to, like, you wrote about you wrote about, I'm imagining you're going to write about Macadelic and all that coming up, but it was just this last moment where you look at Kids, Best Day Ever, then you look at something like Blue Slide Park, and I feel like right after Blue Slide Park is kind of when a major shift happened.
Mm-hmm. Blue Slide Park was the summit of his first career arc, I would say. And then Good AM was the summit of his second career arc. And then right at the Divine Feminine and Into Swimming, that was his third career renaissance. And so I think that he was like a well-made play, had 3 perfect acts, and he grew and grew and grew, and he was always experimenting. And I think we even knew we could determine that You was coming and that Macadelic was coming from moments on Blue Slide Park. I think back to Under the Weather. That's such a musical track, so it was only a matter of time. And those are the things that I want to excavate, and I want to make this, like, lineage out of his discography. I really want to get into the nitty-gritty on what it is that was happening and look at it on a micro level and then a macro level. This morning I spent like 30 minutes looking for a Super Mario Bros. Sample on Faces, because I really want to draw these connections that we didn't get to draw because the media cycle moves so quickly, and we take people for granted when they're alive and constantly putting out music.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and I think that's cool how you mentioned that on Blue Slide Park, because when you listen to it when it first came out, of course there's the tracks you pick out, whether it's Party on Fifth Ave and Up All Night. Those were my favorites when it came out. But then if you look at the actual album now and look at what tracks kind of determine where he went following that, Of the Soul, Under the Weather, like you said. So I think you're right. I think if you look at certain tracks on that album, you can determine really where he was going, and that was just a big shift. And in terms of your idea of like the 3 arcs, I never looked at it like that, but now that you mention it, it starts to really make sense.
Yeah, I think it's like surprise is a compliment until it's not. So being surprised about Macadelic, I totally get it. But then being surprised about watching movies, what do you mean? Like, he was made for this. And I think that's kind of the way that the media treated him sometimes was, the angle was constantly, Mac Miller's really good now, we promise. But I feel like he's always been on track to being really, really good. And if we look at good as an asymptotical thing, as in we can always get better, he was the artist that was always striving for more. And I think we didn't spend enough time on that, sadly.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'd have to agree with that. I mean, one of my favorite projects from Mac is Kids, because of how much of an impact that had on me growing up. And even a project like that where people talk about that, it's like, oh, it's, what do you want to call it, like frat rap or just something like that, and critically not say it's very good. One thing I love throughout that is the samples from the movie Kids. And recently, after Mac Miller's death, I finally went back and watched that movie and realized this movie has a really heavy element to it. And I think that's kind of another thing throughout his career, is that even when people were looking at him and saying, oh, maybe it's not that deep, he was still kind of drawing these influences that had a lot of meaning behind them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always things in the works. I guess I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler for what's coming, but like this whole morning I was working on this piece about how across his discography, he's really obsessed with castles. Like there's a song called Castle Made of Sand on the High Life. And then for the rest of his discography, like there's just these little lyrics about castles that all kind of echo each other. And I don't think it started off intentionally, but it definitely ended quite intentionally. And there's so many threads like that to draw throughout his music. He was very thoughtful. He was very mindful. Like even at his most kiddish, like The High Life is 2009. He's a teenager. He's in high school. Even then, he was like sowing the seeds for something really, really big. And the way that the castle motif ends up playing out all the way to the end of Ladders is brilliant. It's these threads that I think few artists would be able to maintain intentionally or unintentionally throughout their discography.
And I think it goes back to your concept of having the different career arcs, is that when you look at a play or something that has different acts within it, there's always those things that start in the first act and then play out through the second and the third. And just like you mentioned, that castle motif happened in his career.
Yeah, absolutely. And he always says that he had this propensity to drown in his work, and of course, there's some negatives that come with that, but the positives is because he was so immersed in it, he was able to do those things. He was a true creative. People say he was a musician's musician. He was a writer's writer, and, the list goes on.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, you mentioned right there a musician's musician, and your most recent piece dealt with his EP, You, and I just wondered if you could touch on that a little bit, because that's a project, at least in my mind, I've listened to once or twice, but never really gotten that far into, and I think most people maybe have heard of it in passing but haven't really delved into it. What about really going into that project do you think people should kind of take away from it?
He could do anything. He was 20 when he made that all by himself, and it's like a pretty formidable, cool jazz album. And I mean, is it the best jazz album you'll ever hear? No. But he was 20, and he made something so good and so lighthearted, and I think the subtle ways he subverts himself by, like, putting such silly names of the players on the record and pitching his voice to sound like this sultry guy. It all kind of culminates into this moment where you're like, he's a true creative. He really wants to try his hand at everything. He really wants to be a part of everything. Music matters to him across all avenues. And collaborators that you speak with, they'll say that to you. They'll tell you that they really liked him as a person, but they really got into him as an artist when they saw that he would jump on any instrument. His influences were so plentiful. It's like, I think to this moment where he had an interview with Larry King, and Larry King asked him what song on your iPod would surprise people, and he didn't have an answer, probably because his music touches so many genres, nothing surprising. And I think that's the real takeaway. That's his legacy. Is nothing should be a surprise because he did it all.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Just the way he would, bend these genres and just evolve as an artist in total. It was like you said, at certain points maybe it was surprising, but then overall it got to the point where, why are you surprised? This is just what Mac does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to all of your upcoming pieces about this, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about it today.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out. I'm excited. I'm excited for more people to hear about it. This project means the world to me. If one person reads it, if 1 million people read it, the the important thing is that I get to do it.
Well, you can certainly bank that I'll be at least one person reading it each and every week. And I'd love to check in with you certain times throughout the project because, just like everyone else, I think Mac Miller has had an impact on so many people's lives, including mine and yours. And I think it's just such an important project in hip-hop today, and I'm really thankful that you're doing it.
Wow. Thank you. That's so kind. That made my day.
Well, you doing this interview made mine, so thank you so much.
Thank you, man. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.
Again, a big thank you to Donna for coming on to the podcast. Remember, to go check out her stuff on DJ Booth. In addition to the Year of Mac, she's doing every single week. She also has a lot of other great interviews and articles on there. So check her stuff out. She's also on Twitter at Donna C. Wright. I'll have links to her stuff down in the description on whatever platform you're listening to so you can check all of that stuff out. And with that, that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Jackson Neill Music Podcast. Remember, this is brought to you by Believe the Hype, a brand new company selling the latest sneakers. They get the biggest drops and sell them straight back to you guys. So visit the links in the description for their Instagram and Twitter accounts as well as their store. They're right now selling the brand new A$AP Rocky and Under Armour collaboration in select sizes. Also, down in the description, a lot of stuff down there. Links to my Twitter and Instagram at JacksonNeill20. There you will find bonus content. I publish little snippets from my interviews, upcoming stuff, and everything like that. I've had a lot of great guests on my other podcast, the Anything Goes to Jackson Neill podcast. I've had Toby Lou, a sit-down interview with him, a sit-down interview with Marky Basie, a sit-down interview with the band Polyphia. Just a lot of great stuff happening on those. So remember, check those out in the same podcast feed as this one. A big thank you for everyone listening, and I'll see you all next time.